This is the SMSL DL200. It's a DAC headphone amp. And if your budget is $200 or lower, then you should buy this one. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about this DAC headphone amp from SMSL. I have reviewed the AL200, which looks very similar to this, except it's a speaker amplifier and it has a DAC in it. It's a different DAC than the DAC that's in here. The takeaway was that I was highly impressed with the AL200. So I was a little bit curious about how the DL200 would be, because I have had a ton of DAC headphone amps, and most of them, well, they sound pretty similar. But this one's been going to the gym. Let's talk about the specs. Specifications. There's a whole bunch of them. All right, so bear with me. All right, it supports MQA decoding and MQA CD, I think. Which, now that Lenbrook bought them, maybe MQA is gonna have a huge resurgence. Hugely inspired by the MQA acquisition by Lenbrook. I'm actually looking into getting Betamax, adding it to my portfolio of IPs. I think Sith Audio is gonna come out with a new Betamax player. I shouldn't have said that, that's a secret. All right, it has the ES9039. Q2M DAC chip from Seba. I don't think I've heard this one before. I've heard the 9038 Q2M, but not the 9039 Q2M. Bluetooth chip supports LDAC, aptX HD, SBC, AAC. AAC is for Apple. LDAC is for most Android phones. SBC is a catch-all, so it's going to handle any Bluetooth from any device. And aptX HD, also mostly Android. aptX HD and LDAC is a bit redundant, but that's okay. It's better to have both and not need them than to need them and not have them. Third generation XMOS processor. Does PCM, of course, and DSD, up to DSD 512. Got an audio clock processing circuit, which is interesting. I have seen this on different DACs before, but it's basically where you can compensate if you have clocking issues, basically with, I don't know, different settings on the DAC. It's got USB input, coaxial input, optical, digital input, obviously, Bluetooth input. Also has TRS balanced outputs as well as single-ended RCA outputs. And they say it's got a low noise switching power supply. Wouldn't it be funny if it had, hey, this has got the high noise switching power supply, internal switching power supply. It's terrible. It's high noise. No, it's a low noise, which is good. Low is better than high when it comes to noise. And it's also got a Japan Audio Association high-res certification. Okay. Equipped with a full function remote control. Looks a lot like this because this is the remote control. I have about 30 of these. If you are new here and you're not subscribed, you should subscribe and fill out the Google form, because at 200,000 subscribers, we're giving away a whole bunch of stuff. Speakers from Wharfdale, speakers from Q Acoustic, speakers from SVS, subwoofer from RSL, streamer from Weem, amps from Fozzy Audio, tube amp from Black Ice Audio, a whole bunch of stuff. The only thing you need to do is fill out the Google form. Also linked in the description, also linked in the pinned comment. Subscribe, obviously. Throw a comment down there. And then follow me on Instagram at Cheap Audio Man. It's coming up too. I think we're almost at 198,000 subscribers. So thank you so much for watching. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Don't do it a whole bunch of times though, from different accounts, because if I see your name a whole bunch of times, you're not going to win. So if you enter like 10 times or fill out the Google form 10 times, you're not going to win if you win. Listen to this in my office on speakers. Those speakers were the B2 Plus from Emotiva. The best speaker under $500, probably under $1,000, in my opinion, and for my listening preferences, okay? I don't know if you can get that speaker anymore. Anyway, B2 Plus. That was going into, so the DL200 was going into the PT2, which is an Emotiva preamp. However, I was bypassing the internal DAC, of course, so it was just going into analog analog 1, an analog connection. And then I had that going out to the A1 mono blocks from Emotiva. The Weem Pro, shocker, was providing the source material for these. So I had the Weem optical maxed out, the highest resolution available, and I was also running MQA, the MQA beta. So it's a way for the Weem to output MQA, if you're so interested. I also tried these with the Dan Clark closed back, what is it? Dan Clark Aeon, that's what it is. Dan Clark Aeon RT closed back, okay? It's about a $500. I don't know if they sell it anymore, but it's a 13 ohm headphone. Extremely hard to drive headphone. Let's talk about how it works. I don't often have to dive into menus, but I had to dive into menus for the DL200, which is interesting because I also had to dive into the menus for the AL200. So let's go through the inputs because it's not super intuitive. So once you hit this, you select the input, which is USB, Bluetooth, optical, or coaxial. The next selection in the menu is basically, do you want this to be a headphone amplifier or a speaker amplifier? The speaker amplifier is denoted as LO, which means line output. Makes sense to me now, but when I was first messing with it, I had no idea what low meant. HO is a headphone output. Again, now it makes sense. There are two gain selections for the headphone amplifier. You got GH and GL. Again, super obvious now, but when I was looking at it, I didn't know what GH was. And I was listening to it through speakers, so when I would change it, nothing would happen. All right, you have 7 different filters, minimum phase, linear phase, blah, 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 a bunch of phases. I was actually able to hear a little bit of a difference. I landed on FL2. FL3 kind of rolled off the highs, but FL2 more sparkly. So the takeaway here is, depending upon what your listening preferences are, if you play with these filter roll-offs, filter things, you probably are going to hear a difference. And generally speaking, I don't hear a ton of difference. I liked 2 and I liked 5. But you could definitely hear a boost in the, not necessarily a boost in the bass, you could definitely hear emphasis in the bass, and I could definitely hear a de-emphasis on the top end on certain filters. And then there were some that kind of combined it, almost kind of like a loudness button. Anyway, if you get this thing, you're gonna have to play with those filters to find what you like. The next menu setting is DPLL, and this is pretty interesting. I have seen this on other DACs before, but basically it's a way to compensate if you're having clocking issues and you're having stuttering issues or anything like that. So you can select 1 through 9. The higher you go, the more clocking compensation you're having the DAC do. I just left it at 1. I didn't really have any issues with the Weem. But if you have an older device, an older digital device, and you have some sputtering and stuttering, then this may come in handy for you. They also say that they have a completely different clocking circuit on here. Kind of cool, especially for a product that's under $200, $190 to be exact. Because they sell really expensive reclockers that you're supposed to put between your source and your DAC. Even though a lot of DAC chips have reclocking in them to begin with. Anyway, clocking compensation. Whether or not it's useful for you, I don't know. I didn't particularly need it, but you might. The next mode is USB mode. Now, I have not seen something like this. So basically this has 2 USB modes. One doesn't need a driver, so you can hook it up to any USB device. The second needs a driver, a little bit more complicated. So USB 2.0 mode, which I think is the high speed everything USB mode, does need a driver. But if you've got a PS5 or a Switch or anything like that, it says you should use USB 1.1. That only supports up to 24-bit 96 kilohertz. Obviously, the USB 2.0 connection supports full high-res everything. But, once again, a fairly useful feature. And then the last thing on the menu is the brightness. So there's 8 different settings for the brightness. So you can really dial in that brightness exactly how you want it to be. Let's talk about how it did with headphones. Okay, my Dan Clark's 13 ohm, really difficult to drive headphone. Usually a headphone maxes out its power at 32 ohms. However, at 16 ohms, this thing puts out a massive 3 watts of headphone, yeah, I said it right, headphone power. And there's no differentiation between the single-ended headphone output and the 4.4 balanced headphone output, which means I don't think it's actually truly balanced when you're coming out with a 4.4 pentagram gone con connection. Doesn't matter though, because I was listening to the Dan Clark's single-ended, and I will say this DL200 headphone amplifier DAC owned the Dan Clark's. It was amazing how dynamic that headphone was. And if you don't get the right amplification on that headphone, it's a very flat headphone. I had bass punch, I had sparkle, I think it was the best headphone amplifier that I've ever heard for the Dan Clark's. So if you have super low impedance headphones and you're having a little bit of issues driving that, you want a little bit more dynamics in your life, the DL200 is the headphone amplifier to get. And it just so happens to have a fully functioning, very useful DAC that comes along with it, all for $190. That's pretty much all I have to say about the headphone amplifier. I tried it on the Edition XS. It was great, but the Edition XS is great on most headphone amplifiers. The DCs, that's why I use them, can quickly show you the limitations of a headphone amplifier. Really impressed with a headphone amplifier. Let's talk about how it sounds. Well, depending upon what filter setting you're using is going to depend upon how this thing sounds, because it actually sounds different with each, sorry, there's like some type of either bug or a piece of dust that was floating through the air. Anyway, depending upon which filter setting you're going to use is going to greatly impact the sonics. The ones that I landed on were never harsh, and that used to be a real issue with affordable DACs, especially from SMSL, like the Sanskrit 10, the Topping E30, E30 Mark II. A lot of those were really harsh on top. This is not. It's very organic, and in some cases even rolled off on top depending upon which filter setting you're using. It had a big soundstage, or an acceptable soundstage at least, on speakers. Now, I didn't do any extensive A/B testing against other DACs because this is a bit of a different kind of product, because you have a crazy headphone amplifier in here and you have a good DAC which decodes everything you need it to. So some people will buy this as a standalone DAC, but if you only buy it for a standalone DAC, I think you're missing out on the biggest value proposition of this product because it has such a good headphone amplifier. Actually, the funny thing is, I wish this had an analog input, because just as a headphone amplifier, I think this is worth the $190 asking price. I think they missed a bit of an opportunity here. So the takeaway on the sound: punchy full bass depending upon which filter setting you have. Clean, clear, organic highs without any digital crunchiness or artifacting or anything, any of the weird stuff that sounds unnatural that I've heard on other affordable DACs. I mean, this is $190. I think the E30 Mark II comes in well over $100. I think the E50 from Topping, which is a good DAC, comes in, I think, at $200. Really impressed. What are my final thoughts? Well, if you've made it this far in the video, I thank you. Please thumb up the video if you've gotten any value out of it, and please subscribe. But I'm pretty much just gonna repeat myself at this point. I think this is the best headphone amplifier combo DAC that you can get under, I don't know, $500. Like, I think there's the M500 Mark II, 3, or 7 from SMSL. I don't think it holds a candle to this thing, especially when it comes to headphone amplifier power. This also has like 6 of the really good TI op amp chips. So it has 4 of the dual op amp OPA 1612, and you can't change these out. So what you get is what you get. But that's a really good op amp from Texas Instruments. Their measurements say that it comes in with 130 dB of dynamic range and 130 dB of signal to noise ratio, which is insane. Those numbers are really crazy. Well, I don't know if it's been independently verified or not, But what I can say is this thing sounds awesome, is a huge value proposition, and if you need a headphone amplifier slash DAC, or you're even curious about getting into headphones and you need a new DAC, this is a crazy value. Crazy value. Crazy value. I'm highly impressed. Highest recommendation I can possibly give on a product. Very impressed with this whole line. The AL200 blew me away. The D200, DL200, what is it? DL200 blew me away. Highly impressed. I will link it in the description. That will be an affiliate link, which means if you click any buy, I do get a commission. Doesn't cost you any more, though. So it's a great way to support the channel. I'll also link it to Amazon and Apos. They're U.S. Well, obviously, Amazon's a U.S. company. So if you need to do a return or anything or warranty work, you may consider shopping with them too. Crazy value. Menus are a little bit wonky to get into, but once you figure it out, again, read the manual so you know what all their little acronyms mean, because I didn't initially. But outside of that, I mean, it's built well. Got some really cool brushing here on the front. Really cool, really kind of sleek little products. If I could only have, like if I was traveling, I would actually bring this with me and put it in a laptop sleeve in my bag and use this to listen to my music at night in a hotel on headphones. I mean, obviously this is bigger than a dongle DAC, but if you want the utmost out of your headphones on the road, you might as well get that. I mean, it's the size of a book. Pleasantly surprised, really impressed. So if you want to support the channel, you can sign up for Patreon, patreon.com/cheapbodyman. Every Sunday night, we have Patreon-only Zooms, Patreon-only Discord, Patreon-only Facebook group. You can also use the links. Those are affiliate links, which means if you click any buy, I get a commission. Doesn't cost you any more, so it's a great way to support the channel. You can also give me some money for coffee or a tip. Down at the bottom of the video, there's a thanks button. If you got any value, you want to throw me a couple of bucks, please feel free, but also don't feel compelled to buy me anything. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Get yourself a DL200, put your hardest to drive headphones on there, and relax, because it's going to be awesome. And with that, I'm Randy. Fill your soul with happiness. And then I'm Randy, and I'm the Cheap Audio Man. Well done, Randy. Smooth.